Hi, everyone. Welcome to Please Excuse My OCD. My name is Tyler, and I am here with my friend Kyle Moore, who is a mental health podcaster, a great advocate for mental health, and a former contestant on Big Brother Canada. He lives with anxiety and OCD. And growing up in rural New Brunswick, Kyle saw firsthand the stigma that exists for young men such as ourselves struggling with mental health. After reaching out, he actually got the help that he needed and now is able to share his story and experiences on his podcast, Life's a Wreck. As always, before we start, I always tell people we are not mental health professionals. At least I'm not. And whenever it comes to anything that people struggle with, please seek advice from a mental health professional. Kyle, thanks so much for hanging out with me.
Yeah, of course, Tyler. No, it's super exciting to chat about this stuff. This is like I get fired up about this stuff because this is like when I think about like why I started my podcast and why I love to talk about like my experiences, like the opportunity to like jam with somebody like yourself. Like never could have imagined being like, you talked about in the bio, younger, man growing up in
Mm-hmm.
rural Canada, seeing like two dudes in their like 20s 30s, just talking openly about the experiences that they've had with their mental health, specifically OCD, anxiety, those things. Very very cool. So I could not be more excited to get into it, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, this is great. And you know, the cool thing about it is, and I've talked about this prior with other people in regards to social media and just connecting people in this space. And so like it gives us kind of it's just a community that really is built around, people who have struggled with a lot of the same things. So I guess from my perspective, I'm really curious about what it was like growing up, in a rural area like New Brunswick, and really how that shaped your experience with anxiety and OCD.
uh, Man, it played such a role. Like when I think of when I really started to talk, openly about OCD, I didn't even really know what OCD meant until I got into university, and started seeing a counselor for, my mental health issues at that time. OCD was something that like until I was 20 years old, I'm 25 now. So literally like, in my early 20s, I thought that OCD was, hey, take the pencils and align them on the desk, like that very typical, um,
Yes.
stereotypical what you see in movies, the like wiping down the doorknob and, oh, I'm sorry, I'm OCD. Like that's what I thought OCD was, and I was like, I'm not OCD. Are you kidding me? Like I got,
Right.
I've my room's a mess, my desk's messy. Like that can't be me. I can't be that guy. And so I was just like, oh no, I'm just broken. There's something in me that just doesn't tick right, and that was just perpetuated by, I think, very much so growing up in a community where the only time we talked about mental health was like we had like growing in high school, like we had one assembly a year where somebody would come in and they would talk about mental health, but it would be, they would talk about suicide, and they would come in and they would talk about suicide, and it would typically be the family of somebody who had died by suicide coming in and more or less talking about like the impact that it's had on their family. And although like I totally want to, acknowledge that very much so. I'm sure that that was, very important for them, and uh, an important message to share. There was almost a guilt element involved, and so it was like, hey, here's the most extreme, circumstance that can transpire when mental health goes unchecked. But like the entire 99.99% of the other mental health journey was just completely ignored. And so it was just something where it was like, okay, well, unless it's like absolutely code red, DEFCON 1, like we don't talk about it. Like that's not an open conversation. You shouldn't be comfortable to have these conversations.
Hmm.
And especially like, with young men, the guys I was growing up around, it was very much so that like I played a ton of sports growing up. And it was very much so that like, don't be a pussy, be a man, don't complain. How tough are you? Like
Hmm.
what you can endure is where your value lies. And so I just kind of was suffered in silence. I knew that there was something going on intuitively in my gut. I was like, this doesn't seem right. I could never sleep through the night. I was constantly having anxiety attacks. At the time, I didn't even know. Like I kind of knew what an anxiety attack was. I kind of didn't. There was
Yep.
this weird, just kind of like, why do I feel like I'm gonna die all of a sudden? Like what the fuck is going on? And so yeah, man, it was just something where I was like, I always had wanted. I had the opportunity to travel when I was young. I joined like some travel clubs in school, and like being able to kind of broaden my horizons really gave me the opportunity to see like, oh, there are communities and there are people who like want to have these conversations, and maybe it's okay if I do kind of start to talk about this thing, and maybe I can go get help, and that doesn't make me less of a man or anything like that.
Yeah.
And then that was, went to university and started to get the help that was long overdue.
Dude, I feel that. So like I relate to that on so many levels. And I'm listening to you talk and I'm having like flashbacks of my own life. And I'm like, wow. Like especially with growing up in sports, and that mentality of like, don't be a pussy. Like what did your grandma raise you? And like all these like different
Yeah.
ways that people would just really try to belittle your experience, whatever that was. And it's so wild how that really does play a role in how you look at yourself and how you deal with
Oh,
whatever these things that are coming at you are. um when you
dude,
talk about
1,000%. I
go ahead.
I just wanted to like share that was something that the self-loathing component of it, huge, dude, huge. It
Yep.
was something where I remember very much so that like, and maybe we'll get into it more, but like I've had two crisis moments in my life, two moments of like some pretty extreme suicidal ideation, and the first of which, the reason that like I kind of had a plan in place, the reason I didn't follow through with it is because I hated myself so much at the time that I was like, you don't deserve the release of like being able to take the emergency exit on the way out. Like
Yeah.
you deserve to suffer because there was just so much of that internalized. You are a pussy. You do suck. You're a burden on all the people around you. All that stuff. Um, so yeah, the self-loathing component, like that's like the environment I think played such a role in developing that sense of self and that negative sense of self that took so long to unlearn. It was, I mean, hell, I'm still working on it. It's been a
Yeah.
5 year process, and I'm just scratching the surface.
Wow. I mean, I thank you for going into that and really just being open enough to talk about these kind of things, because they are hard to talk about, but they are necessary. And there's so many people who share those emotions and those experiences to a degree, right? That we need to have these
Totally.
types of conversations. So I'm wondering for you, and you said you had two crisis moments in your life, and are you able to kind of go through like what was the first time, where was the first time that you were like, hey, like this is an issue and I need help?
Mm. So I feel like those two statements, I feel like the acknowledgement of both those things happened like pretty far in between. The this is an issue, this is a problem, that happened when I was like 7. Like truly, it was one of those things where some of my earliest memories. I shared this on the podcast. Some of my earliest memories are of mental distress. Like I remember having anxiety attacks at 4 or 5 years old. I remember not being able to sleep through the night. I mean, like my parents had a cot, like a military camping cot,
Yep.
set up at the end of their bed, so that I would like more or less like freak out in the middle of the night, it was a nightly occurrence, have a panic attack, go into their bedroom, sleep on the cot. And that was like up until I was in like grade 4, grade 5. Like it was like,
Wow.
like later into life. The mental stress that I was under, like that, like kind of put some building blocks in place of like when I kind of became conscious of like, here's how I feel on the day to day. And it was like, wow, I don't feel very good. And
Yeah.
so like, I think that was that acknowledgement of being like, oh, I'm like scared all the time. And I also have, with my OCD, one of my earliest OCD intrusive thoughts and the compulsion that went with it, was I had to say good night, love you, see you in the morning to my family. If I didn't have those three things, if I didn't say them in that order, if they didn't respond in a specific order that would came back to me, not only would I not sleep, but the intrusive thought was very much so like at 6, 7 years old, like my family being brutally murdered, and being like, what's wrong with me? Why is this movie playing in my head?
Hmm.
Um, and so that was like certainly something where it was like, yeah, no, I don't think this is normal. But then there was a part of me that, because nobody talked about it and I wasn't being taught mental health literacy or any of that, I was like, is this normal? Like, is everybody also having the same shit and I just can't handle it? And that's when a lot of like you are weak. Oh my God, you're the problem.
Wow.
And yeah, that was when it all started to kind of like click into
Yep.
place. So that was
Wow.
there's a problem. When I thought, okay, I deserve help and I should like seek help, was after my second crisis moment, which there was just something that flicked that day. Very had a very similar kind of plan to the first time, and it was very much so kind of like spurned by just like um, grab what's closest to you, finish the job, and I just remember like this feeling of being like almost like a brief moment of clarity, and the first time I had not followed through on my plan because I was like I don't deserve it, and then the second time was like wow, I'm really capable of feeling things incredibly deeply. And I've felt bad things for a long time. But and there was that but, and that but was kind of like the but that saved my life. But
Yeah.
it was like, but I felt these bad things for so long. But I'm capable of feeling the extremes. I must be capable of feeling the extremes on the other end too. I have to be. Like if it's swinging one way, there's got to be a swing the other way. And so that was the
Yes.
moment of like, I'm going to give myself every opportunity to see if I can let that pendulum swing the other way. And so got into therapy, started talking about it. And that first therapy session I had, I'd love to chat about that too, because that was incredibly like eye-opening, life-changing experience. Because it was like, holy shit, there's a whole other world out there. And
Wow.
this is a journey. Yeah,
That's incredible, man. I mean, just to be able in that moment, because I know how hard it is when you're in that mindset to be in that moment and say, hang on a second, like if I can feel this deeply on the negative, what can I feel on the opposite side? Like that is so
totally.
like that is a very profound thought, and that is something that I feel like a lot of people struggle to even get to that point to think that's even
Totally.
possible. That is I could totally see why that would be like an aha moment almost uh
Yeah.
in that situation. So and then you so that was the catalyst for you to go get help, and you said that,
Mm-hmm.
talking about your first session in therapy, like what was that like when you for the first time sat down and talked to somebody who was like, hey, what's going on?
Yeah, dude, I'm getting giddy. Because it's like, because
Yeah.
it's truly like one of like my favorite memories.
Wow.
Because I just remember, being like, I had actually done so. I had done therapy a little bit before. I had claustrophobia as a kid, one of the ways that my
Hmm.
anxiety manifested. And I was going on a school trip where we're going to like Ottawa, I think. And I was going to have to get in elevators, and I was terrified of elevators. Closed space freaked me out. And so my parents brought me to a therapist for claustrophobia, just claustrophobia, because they were aware that there was some anxiety stuff. And my parents
Hmm.
also wonderful human beings. I think they certainly hadn't been given any mental health literacy conversations, which I think like all parents should, have that opportunity. And so they did the best that they
Absolutely.
could with the information that they had. And so they had put me into therapy for that. So I dipped my toe in the pond of therapy, and I remember like having that experience, being like, okay, that was a positive experience. I went on the trip. I gradually started to get over my claustrophobia. So there was already a seed planted that was like therapy helps. Which is I didn't realize how much of a asset that was, until I went to go to therapy again, and I was like, right, I remember that time. Yeah, I should try this thing. Um,
Hmm.
the day that I went to my therapy session, my first therapy session, at I was at Ryerson at the time. I was in university, now TMU, and I went into like the mental health counseling offices, and I sat there, and I was just like, the fuck am I going to tell this person? Like, I this has been years and years and years, and I've got an hour to try to like kind of like download what's been going on.
Hmm.
And so I was kind of like, how much do I tell them? Do I really want to tell them everything? Like, what, blah blah blah. But I still had that feeling of like coming off the crisis moment, being like, what do you got to lose? Like, might as
Right.
well put it all out there. And so I went in, and this therapist was like really kind right off the bat, like really genuine, seemed to like actually care, which is like huge. Because sometimes you find yourself, I've had people who have reached out and said like, my therapy experience was I was a number, I didn't have the very sterile. And so I was
Yep.
really I was really privileged to kind of be met with, I think, the kindness and humanity that I think is so important in mental health conversations. um,
Absolutely.
and so I sat down, and she more or less just said like, what brings us in today? and it was like there was like a little, me inside of myself, and you know inner child work is something that I'm really passionate about. But like I felt like there's just like part of me just jumped out, and it was
Hmm.
like, and I talked for 56 minutes of our hour session, and I just like completely, like, the wave of just like, here's how my anxieties showed up, here's this stuff that I don't know what it was, OCD, intrusive thoughts,
Hmm.
here's this, here's that, here's all the different things, like the ways it physically manifests. I'm sick all the time. My stomach's a mess. Here's this, here's that. I told her everything. I spilled my guts, right?
Yeah.
And I remember afterwards, I stood in front of this woman, and I felt like I was like naked. I felt like a crab without a shell.
Yep.
I was like, this is the most vulnerable I've ever been as a human being, and I don't know this lady. And I'm like, what the fuck did I just do? And so there was that part of me that, because I never told anybody about this, I was like, I'm going to a hospital. Like, I'm going
Yeah.
to a hospital. I just told her all of these intrusive thoughts that are like heinous, heinous things, as you know. Like,
Yes.
intrusive thoughts get messy, and
Yes.
and I was like, so I told this person who I don't know about all of the deepest, darkest, nitty gritty, disgusting things that my mind produces, and we just sat there in silence for 30 seconds, which felt like the hour, in and of itself.
Sure.
And I remember, like, basically just sitting back and being like, holding my breath. I was like, what the fuck is this lady gonna say? And I remember she just like looked at me, and she goes, she had written down a few things on a notepad, which, by the way, I hated when she was doing it, but I was like, fine,
Yep.
I'll let her do her thing. And she looked down at her notepad, and then she like looked back up at me, and she's like, that sounds really tough.
Yeah.
Dude, I fucking broke down. I spent the next 4 minutes or whatever I wailed. I hadn't cried in years, and I cried and cried and cried, because I was
Oh
just
my
like,
God.
yeah, it fucking was. And it was in that moment that I was like, I don't need to be fixed. I don't
Yep.
need, like, you to send me away somewhere. Like, you're okay with this. Like, all of this, all of my worst fears like evaporated in that moment. And I was like, holy shit, I might actually get better. And that
Wow.
was something that I was like, yeah, that was you want to talk about, there's no, there's no
Yeah.
drug, there's no experience I've had in my life that has left me with that kind of high.
Yep.
It was a hell of a moment for sure.
That's incredible. I mean, I got goosebumps listening to that, and like I know
Dude, I
that
got goosebumps
feeling.
telling it, man. It's still
I
it's
get it.
still right there.
It's like it's your inner child, really. I mean, I know you said earlier, like, you're really passionate about like doing the inner work and the healing, and
Totally.
like your inner child almost was like, oh my gosh, like this is okay, like we are going to figure this out. And I
Yeah.
totally understand, like, opening up to a doctor or a mental health professional and feeling like they're going to send you away, because it is the scariest thing
Totally.
that it's and you're so vulnerable. And at that point, like you said, you're like, what do I have to lose at this point? You know? So um I wish that more people I wish that, like, I know it was probably different for us because 15, 20 years ago it was so different surrounding the conversation of mental health and OCD. And so we had the unfortunate aspect of growing up and being like, what is this, and
Yeah.
why is nobody else like this?
Mm-hmm.
um and so now, if somebody's watching this, watching this podcast, watching your podcast, and listening to your story, hopefully they can feel that same sense of like, okay, so I get how like heinous my thoughts are, but maybe it is okay if I go talk about them.
Totally. I mean,
You
that's
know?
the mission. Like, I know how much it's meant to me, to hear other people talk about their mental health issues, mental illnesses, OCD, intrusive thoughts. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, like, I can still remember hearing podcasts where people talked about their OCD, and like they, said what I had going on in my brain with confidence, and they said it with
Yeah.
like out shame and judgment. And I was like, holy shit, oh my god, like,
Yep.
this isn't just me. Like, that's a powerful feeling. And man, I mean, this might be the podcaster in me, but I'd actually really love if and I'm sure your listeners are like, oh, maybe we've heard this before, but I'd really love to hear maybe a little bit about like what it was like, kind of double clicking on what your experiences were like, because obviously it sounds like
Yeah.
there's a little bit of a bit of parallel.
Yeah. I'm listening to your story and listening to you speak, and it's like we almost had the exact same experience where, as you know, OCD kind of manifests itself in different ways in different themes. And it wasn't until I was 19 when I went to my doctor at the time because I wasn't seeing a therapist. And I told him all the intrusive, literally the same thing where I told him all the intrusive thoughts. I was like, I'm having thoughts like this and this. And I was ready for him to call the cops and be like, let's get this kid to a hospital and get this kid like
Totally.
locked in.
Yeah.
And then he was like, no, this is your OCD. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, this is what it is. And
Oh
so
no.
create like I can totally empathize with what you're saying, where that sense of relief, and where he looked at me and he was like, yeah, like you're, this is what it is, and like we're gonna make sure that you're okay. And he gave me, that was the first time I was on actually medication, Paxil. And
Okay.
um so like I'm
I'm a
just like
Zoloft boy myself.
okay, so you understand, you
I
know,
get it.
the wonderful world of SSRIs. So
Hmm.
but yeah, that was like almost mirror situation when talking to somebody for the first time about these kind of thoughts. And I wasn't having those kind of thoughts as a 10-year-old. It was other things like contamination and
Yeah.
um, being afraid to leave the house, and just a bunch of different things. But I was never guided along the way of like, hey, this is exactly why you're having those thoughts, and this is kind of what we do about it.
Right. And that just goes to
Mm.
show, right, that like diagnosis is half the battle. It's a huge part of the battle. But then like the literacy component afterwards, and also being able to see yourself in other people's stories, like that's a huge, the awareness
Yeah.
component is just so massive.
Yeah, it totally is. And I'm really curious too for, you're with your story, and you're super passionate about mental health, and the fact that like it's so cool having someone else who has a podcast on my podcast, because like
I
I
love
we
talking to podcasters, dude. It's the best.
it really is. It's like we're seeing eye to eye here on multiple levels. And I really want to know about your, what it is that I'm assuming it's because you understand what it's like, but that passion, where that passion comes in helping other people with their OCD, and really when that started along like your healing journey.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's something that like it's one of the things that like I've been very fortunate in my life because of the trials and tribulations that I face with my mental health challenges, to kind of find purpose within the storm, within the wreck of it all. I think it really kind of got kickstarted after I dropped the first episode of my podcast. I was always like, I grew up in a household where, especially like both my parents are very giving individuals, and that idea of being a member of your community and giving back and volunteering and charity and all of those things were something that was like, it was a very important part of our family dynamic. I love when you're able to just create some impact. It's the coolest thing. I think that like everything like on the day to day, like the shit sucks
Yeah.
90% of the time. Like life is a very difficult thing to navigate, and the highs and lows, for some people the lows are way lower, for some people the highs are way higher, and like the
Yep.
opportunity to like create infrastructure that builds people up, that's the coolest thing in the world. When I first released the first episode of my podcast, which very much so was born from that same idea of like, what do I have to lose? Why
Hmm.
not talk about it? And the whole idea was, if I one day succumb to this kind of pull to some crisis moments, I would really love the opportunity to have something that I feel like I'm almost like leaving for a younger version of myself. That was it. It was like, if younger Kyle had
Yes.
have heard this podcast, would maybe his life have went on a different path. And
Yes.
so I was like, okay, that's so I created it for me, but I'll never forget after I released the first episode of the podcast, which is so funny, because it like was one of my most listened episodes to date, because there was just so many people from my hometown who were like, "What's this boy talking about mental health for?" And I feel like people were curious, right? It was like, it's like,
Yeah.
you see Kyle Moore, like this guy, this guy started a fucking podcast with his mental health.
Oh my gosh.
And so it like boomed really quick, and it was so funny. I was like, wow, holy shit, this might be a
Yeah.
career.
Yeah.
And sure enough, a few episodes later, people were like, oh no, he's gonna keep doing this. All right, everybody, like, let's
Okay.
pack
Yeah.
it in, let's get out of here. But after that first episode dropped, which was very much so, it was called Life's a Wreck,
Yep.
and it was just about why I was creating the podcast. It was a brief overview of like what I had went through and why I was, deciding to talk about it. And I didn't go into very much detail. I basically just said, like, I'm a man with anxiety and OCD. I've got 2 diagnoses, and I want to kind of talk about what that has looked like throughout my life. And I just love the opportunity. I loved radio. I loved broadcast. I just thought it was really cool to have the opportunity to like have people hear you talk about your story. I always found that neat. And after the first episode went out, I actually got a message, and I'll never forget this message, from one of the guys I played football with in high school.
Yep.
And he reached out, and this guy, like, you want to talk about blue collar dude? This guy was like 6'2", built like a tree. Like, he had a beard when he was like 11. Like, he was that kind of guy. And yeah, dude, just fucking nails and steel beams, man. That guy was wicked. And
Wow.
he reached out to me, and he was like, hey, dude, I just wanted to let you know, I really appreciate you sharing what you did on the podcast. I've been dealing with some stuff on my own, and I think I'm going to go get help because I heard you talk about it. And I was like,
Wow.
that was one episode. And that was like the person, when I was thinking about like, wow, like what kind of impact can be made, that stood out so much, because I was like, that's what more could I ask for if somebody who like is very much so caught up in that, be a man, toughen up, all this kind of stuff, is like, no, fuck that. I can write my own story. Like, this is my life. I get to still be whoever I want and hold value as a man and as an individual, and still go get the help for the things that are bothering me. And I was like, and so anyway, this guy and I have stayed in kind of correspondence over the years. And yeah, sure enough, he's made some like really cool strides, and he's done some really great stuff. But it was after that I was like, there might be more to this than just sharing my own story. This might have that impact that I've been looking for a long time. And then, yeah, one episode after another, and more people started to reach out, and more people started to share the little things that they learned, or the things that they did differently, or all of those things. And it was just like, listenership, that's an arbitrary number. But when you have people who reach out and are like, hey, I decided to make this change that's going to have a lasting impact on my life. Holy shit. Fucking
yes.
There you go. Yep. That's the coolest thing. I couldn't imagine anything more fulfilling.
That's the why, really, is when it comes down to it, and I totally understand that, because people are looking for themselves, really, in other people and in their stories, and when they can see that, especially on, a podcast like yours, that's, when it comes to having a man sit in front of a camera like this, talking about the deepest, most vulnerable aspect of their lives, that is something that I don't think we're as used to as we should be by this point as a society.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think that I just think that it is one of those things where I think that we are very much so. And I've noticed this through like my degree and some of the jobs that I've had, and the podcast, like, we are making a very intentional effort to like personal storytelling. I think like one of the best examples I can think of, and we'll tie it back to sports, is this like boom in athlete centered and athlete centric storytelling, where like athletes are the creators of their own content now, versus it used to just be like the TSN or ESPN or all those, they would do a profile on an athlete, but now it's like you hear the athlete on a podcast talking about their experiences, and so you have this like athlete owned storytelling. And I think that is starting to play a role in everybody's life. I mean, everybody has their own platform right here, right? Like, big or small, the opportunity to like hop in front of a camera or audio or whatever your preferred medium is, and say, hey, interweb, like, this is who I am. And like, and that just gets added to the aggregate of voices who are also sharing, hey, this is who I am. This is who I am. This is who I am. You do start to paint like you're no longer painting with broad strokes. You're actually kind of really getting into the detail of what it means to be a human being. And so I think that that in and of itself is really, really beautiful. I do think that sometimes you can kind of have the conversation of some oversaturation or a uh, almost an over eagerness to share things that kind of extend into that, like, I'm an expert, I'm a,
Hmm.
especially within the mental health realm, you do see, and specifically within men's mental health, you do see some people hop on a
Yes.
camera and they're like, I have the answer. I myself join my club, do this, do that, open your wallet, and
Right.
I'll show you purpose. I'll show you support, because I've got it figured
Right.
out. You don't. You're a mess. I don't.
Hmm.
I'm good.
Hmm.
So I think that, like, there is still the challenges that are faced with kind of like where we're currently at, but I do think that we're trending in a really nice direction.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that, man. And it's interesting that you said that too about how there's like the gurus out there who are like,
Yeah.
hey, take my course and then you'll be free of OCD in 3 weeks. And it's like,
Yeah. Oh man, totally.
man, if that was the answer,
Anxiety
like I would have
away.
been
You're like,
like,
whoa.
like it's taken me 30 years to just get a handle on what's going on. So
100%. You're like, 3 weeks.
it's
Fucking
yeah.
yeah. Here we go. Easy.
Yeah, sure. I'll pay $25 for that, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's so
Exactly.
it really, but it's sad because people who are really in that place where it's so distraught, they're willing to do anything to make sure that they can be okay and get a handle on things. And I know that feeling of
Yeah.
intensity, you know. So it's important for
Oh,
people who have it to like talk about it for real.
that's authentic. Yeah, the authenticity component of it all. And I mean, dude, that's the thing too. Is I think that so often there is like it's that whole idea of, like, the wolf that's caught in the trap will gnaw its leg off to get out of the trap. Like, the
Hmm.
things that you do when you're in the midst of it all, it's easy to, like, look from the outside and be like, look at that person doing X, Y, or Z. That is like a, what a shameful behavior. But it's like, you're not in the middle of the storm, man. Like, you're not trying to
Yeah.
make your way through, like, the different things that you're just trying to just soothe yourself in the moment. I've been there. I've done that.
Hmm.
I have made decisions within my life that I'm, like, not super stoked about.
Hmm.
But they came at a time where it was like, feeling like you had so little options to just feel like not in pain for just a moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, totally. That authentic side of it is so huge, and also just taking a lot of the shame out of it. Because so often one of the reasons that people can't get help is because of the stigma and the shame that still very much exists. Where it's like,
Yes.
oh, I'm not going to help that person. They're an addict. I'm not.
Hmm.
Why would I help that person? They're a lost cause. And it's
Right.
like, if you take the shame and the stigma out of it, that's somebody who's, sure, they're putting a band-aid on a bullet hole, but if it's the only thing you have to stop the bleeding for even a short period of time, a lot of people would take that. A lot of people, if they found themselves in that situation, it'd be a lot harder to stick with your values or whatever.
Hmm.
And by no means do I sit here and say, like, hey, do whatever you got to do, but, like, when
Hmm.
those situations arise, still having the empathy as a human being to be like, man, that's still a person who needs help and deserves help. And it very much so, like, it just deserves to be the healthiest version of who that person is. That's huge.
100%, man. I couldn't have said that better myself, honestly. And one of the things that it seems that you have a lot of empathy for people because you understand, through your own journey of what it's like to struggle with these things. And one of the things that you brought up earlier that I'd like to kind of pick your brain on is you were saying that you are really passionate about like healing the younger self of you.
Yeah.
And for like from your perspective, like what kind of work or that do you do for yourself or like in like the anxiety community? What are you
Mm.
what aspects of that are you most passionate about, and what about it is like really helpful for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that jump to mind, because this is something that along the rockiest parts of my mental health journey, this played one of the biggest roles. And so
Hmm.
the first thing that comes to mind is very intentional child work, like based meditation.
Hmm.
So what I would do, and I recommend it for anybody out there. It's not something, again, like Tyler had said at the off the top. We're not mental health professionals, but this is just something that I'm
Yes.
sharing has helped me. Is doing some like natural breath work of just breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, and kind of allowing yourself that space to almost breathe down into a bit of a meditative space. How I've always done that is like, imagine you're breathing into the top of your head and then breathing out, and then you're kind of just moving down to body parts. And as you breathe out, you're just relaxing that body part. I find it kind of takes you out of your head, puts you in your body, and allows you kind of a space to
Yep.
be a bit more soothed in a moment, which some people would kind of call it a bit of a meditative state. And in there, what I would do is I would imagine a door in front of me. Once you're kind of in that relaxed place and you're kind of you're letting your imagination take over, and your mind is kind of, you're letting it free. I would imagine a door in front of me, and I wouldn't try to pretend what door it's I wouldn't say it must be a red door. It'd just be like, there's a door in front of me. Sometimes it's a metal door, sometimes a wood door, a red door, whatever.
Sure.
And on the other side of that door is a version of myself. And so I would imagine opening the door, and I wouldn't try to say, I'm going to talk to 12-year-old Kyle. I'm going to talk to 10-year-old Kyle. I'm going to talk to 70-year-old Kyle. It would simply be, who needs to have a voice today? And what part of me needs to talk? And so I would open that door, and I would just, like, without judgment, without shame, allow that whatever Kyle decided to show up, and typically it was a younger version of myself, I would allow them the space to talk about whatever they felt they needed to talk about, share whatever they needed to share, be held in a way that they needed to be held, whatever that might be. And I found that was incredibly healing and provided me. You want to talk about the self-loathing? That was something where it's like, as I got to know myself better, and as I started to accept every version of myself, the versions of myself that I wasn't super proud of, the versions
Hmm.
of myself that I aspired to be, all of it kind of combined, and understanding that, like, my journey as a human being is not defined by one moment or another, but instead just kind of more so the body of work. I that brought me a lot of, like, it brought me a lot of peace, and it also brought me a lot of, like, I started to like who I was. And man, that is a fun feeling to have after years and years of being like, fuck that guy in the mirror. That guy sucks.
Yep.
Being able to be like, I don't mind that guy in the mirror. That guy's okay. That's a huge step.
Yes.
So yeah, that was a big one. I have fun tattooed on my thigh,
Yep.
because I didn't have a lot of fun as a kid. Listen, I had awesome moments. I had great friends, good parents. I had
Sure.
some really fun times, but there was so many moments that I feel like were lost to my mental health. Moments where I decided I can't be a kid right now. I'm on high alert. I'm in fight or flight. I
Yes.
can't be a kid. That idea of OCD too, and I'm sure this is something that might resonate with you, is that idea of, like, I have to take care of my parents and my family.
Hmm.
When my parents leave, if I do a certain thing, it'll keep them safe. Now all of a sudden I'm
Yes.
responsible for them. And so
Hmm.
that takes away that parent-child caretaker relationship. It kind of flips the switch a little bit.
Yep.
And so that have fun, like, in truly doing things for the sake of, like, not like doing things so I can bring a camera and be like, hey, podcast world, like, look at me having fun.
Right.
But like going and doing things with the people that I care the most about solely for the purpose of fun. I think we lose fun, we lose play, as we continue to grow. And I think that one of the best ways that you can provide your inner child with some, like, support and just some love is to
Yeah.
play, is to just go and enjoy this. Like, life's a weird thing, right?
Yeah.
I always have to remind myself that, like, we are on a floating rock hurtling through the vast universe. Nothing's guaranteed. I could walk out of this, I could walk out of my house later, and a bus, blows
Yeah.
through me. Like, all of
Yeah.
these things could happen. And taking a moment to be like, wow, I'm just going to experience life for a minute. That's huge. So those two things are some of the first things that come to mind. And then
Wow.
the last thing is talking with students. I've got
Mhm.
a Monday, I'm going to a high school that is like 30 minutes away from my hometown, to talk to them about mental health and give them kind of like the mental health literacy, 101, very, very kind of meat and potatoes, but still stuff that I think, would have been hugely beneficial for me. Tell them my
Yes.
story, talk about the things that I wish I had have known when I was their age. That also provides me a lot of healing, because it's like, hey, hey, Kyle, remember when you could have used this? Well, like, hey, here we go. Now is an opportunity for us to step up to the plate,
Yep.
and pass along, this potential wellness, and really kind of like maybe put some people on a path that is going to celebrate them more as an individual than I had the opportunity to be on. So yeah, those three things
Wow.
are the things I would say come to mind.
I mean, they're all incredible. It's just so, dude, it's so funny. I feel like I'm talking to myself. Like so many things that you said.
Shared
I
experience, man.
Yeah, like I totally. I said the exact same thing that you said to my dad the other day, where he's like, "Do you miss
Yeah,
your childhood?" And I was like, I don't. Like my parents were great too. I had great friends, but it's like so much of it was taken away because we were in our heads. We were anxious. We were worried about
one hundred
everything
percent.
else and everything
Yeah.
that and everyone that we cared about. And now looking back, like I have so much more now, and as I'm sure it sounds like you do too, like mentally, where you can have fun and you can
Mm-hmm.
enjoy. And you're right, like we're one solar flare away from just being wiped out. Like
Yeah,
like we,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like why are we taking everything so seriously all the time?
Dude,
And
100%. It's like it is so funny when you take that 10,000 foot view, and you're like you're
yeah,
sitting there, and I'll be like hanging out with my girlfriend, and I'm like, should we go to the park and get a coffee and sit? Like, oh, like there, I could do some work or whatever. And like you said, it's
yeah,
like if you took the 10,000, you're like, dude, what the fuck? Like you're gonna sit there on a Sunday, a beautiful day, and you're gonna
right,
like sit here at a laptop and go, I have to work today. Like,
yeah,
no, man,
yeah.
like go have fun, like live life. It's
It's so
I'm sure
funny.
if we ever had aliens come to the planet, they'd be like, what the fuck are you
Yeah.
guys doing? Like this is
Yes.
like this is weird. You guys are stressed out about the
Yes.
randomest stuff.
Yes.
So yeah, man,
We're
just having that
we're
opportunity to just do you.
I love it, man. We're playing roles. That's really what we are, is we're playing the role as, the accountant or
Right, right, a hundred
the
percent. Yeah.
the project manager, whatever it is. But like, and it sounds like you're pretty aware. Like I'm just listening to you because I grew up Catholic. I grew up in a very Catholic home,
Mm.
and I ended up having like a pretty existential crisis, which really worked with my OCD, like existential OCD. It was like super terrifying for me in my early 20s, and then I got to a point where it was like outside of that, where I was able to think like, okay, like maybe the person I think I am is because of where I grew up and this and that, and I can really be whoever I want to be, and like this is all just a play. It's kind of interesting. Like, did you ever have like those like existential thoughts, especially as being a deep thinker like you are? Like, did that ever hit you at one point, or was it just kind of like gradual?
Man, I was having existential crises in like the crib, bro. Like in the second that
Yeah.
when I learned about, I will never forget. You want to talk about things that your like anxiety and OCD latches onto?
Yep.
My big one was the D word. It was death.
Yes. Yep.
The first day, like I remember my parents talking to me about, like, I think it might have been like my great great grandmother or something like that, or great 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 grandmother at the time when I was just a small child, had like passed away. And my parents kind of had that, like, I'm sure what was a very much so like a we are parents, holy fuck, time to pull up our pants kind of moment, where you're
Yes.
like, I have to be a parent today and talk about what death means to this little kid who my parents were well aware had like anxious tendencies. And
Yes.
so they told me about death, and I was like what?
What?
You like
Yeah.
you mean this is gonna like end and we don't know what comes after? And bro, like that
Yep.
was my mind. I was convinced, like I essentially convinced myself at like 6 years old that I was gonna figure death out. Like I was going to get to a point where if I thought about it hard enough, I would figure it out. And so yeah, I thought about that constantly. So that idea of like reflecting on your own mortality, reflecting
Yeah.
on the importance of family and connection and community, like all of those topics were very much so kind of put on my plate, at a younger age. But yeah, so many of those moments, like those existential kind of turning point moments as an individual, like I, so thankful for each and every one, because as much as they cause anxiety, and they manifest in such uncomfortable and ugly ways at times.
Hmm.
The opportunity to experience all of it. That's kind of like the crux of Life's a Wreck, very much so, is like the opportunity, because like all of this is a wreck. Like I'm a very staunch believer that like as good as life can be, like life is a wreck. There are so many
Yeah.
nuances that don't go your way, and things that don't play out, and you're not in control of so little. We consistently like trick ourselves into thinking that we have our hand on the pulse of like life, and
Yes.
instead of realizing that like we were born on a surfboard on a wave that's 1,000 feet tall, and we're like, I can shred this thing, and it's like, sure, maybe you can shred your little part of it, but like this thing
Right.
is out of control. Like you are along for the ride.
Yeah.
So you might as well embrace the good, the bad, the ugly, the good days, the highs, the lows, all of it. And so I think like with those existential moments, even though they were anxiety inducing, like they still allowed you an opportunity to see a part of existence that
Hmm.
was new to you. It's a new experience, and how cool it is. Like, in this grand scheme of things, you got to lift another rock
Yep.
of all of this like information that you don't know. And then okay, I had this thought, but now I think completely differently. Like, I grew up thinking that there was, for an example, somebody out there might be like, I grew up, very much so like within the church, and grew up
Hmm.
with my faith. And as I got older, I started to make a turn towards kind of believing more so in a being out there, but I didn't know exactly. I'm more agnostic. I don't really know exactly what it
Yes.
is. Okay, well then that experience in and of itself, that's again lifting a new rock. You didn't shut yourself out from exploring all these things, and what you find
Hmm.
out on the rock might be again uncomfortable and not great, and it might be scary, but it's
Yep.
still something you got to see, and I think that's really really cool. So yeah, being able to explore as much of all of this stuff, physical, mental, as
Yep.
possible, I think is really really neat. And Yeah, can't shut yourself out from any experience, because
Yeah.
it's all just part of part of
Yeah.
your roll around this planet.
Yeah, man. That's such a great way to put it. And life really is like you walking along an endless shoreline beach and just lifting up rocks, hoping you don't get like, attacked by a stingray. It's
Yeah.
it's like it's wild. That's such a great
100%. And then from
way.
the shoreline, you have somebody who's like, buy my course and I'll tell you how to find the stingrays. And like, oh, yeah, right. I
That's
forgot about that guy.
oh my god, that's hilarious, man. You know what? This is great. I try to keep my podcast under an hour, but most of the time I don't, because I just want to keep asking questions and talking
100%.
and like feeling about like all these different, because I relate to you like 100% on so many of these levels. Like I got to talk to you after about some things and just about life, because I'm just like, dude, like we vibe. This is something.
100%. Good
So
energy, man. Tyler, you got a good energy, buddy. I'm telling you.
likewise, man, likewise. I really want people to really, what they get, from this episode is the fact that like you're somebody who came from a place that was like, this is who you are, this is what you do, this is what we do, and then you kind of expanded past that. And I really want people to get that message here with OCD and anxiety, because there's so much that people around us or people just in society tell us about ourselves, that and then we start to tell ourselves the same story. And it's really not until we get past that barrier where it's like super uncomfortable, you're bare naked saying everything that's inside of you, and then all of a sudden that's the point where healing begins. At like, like you said, you're now at a point where it's like, oh wait, I can actually stand this guy, like he's pretty all right, looking in the
Yeah.
mirror. And I'm on that same journey too, where I'm trying to like be kinder to myself and be compassionate and allow myself to just be who I am right now in this moment. And I think that's just really important. And it's really incredible that we can have these types of conversations. And I want everybody to check out Life's a Wreck. I'm going to go on a binge this weekend, I'll tell you that, and listen to the whole
Appreciate
catalog
that
you
too.
got there. But
Thank you, man.
I'm really, really stoked that you're here. I would like to ask you, is there anything that I would like to have you again, but is there anything that you want
100%.
to kind of like leave here and here on the podcast?
Yeah, and vice versa, man. Would love to do some work over on Life's a Wreck
I would
together. I think
love
it'd be a
to.
lot of fun.
Absolutely.
I think lead with curiosity is always something that I'm very, I I love to tell people, because I think so often we shut ourselves out from curiosity at an age. Like, you remember when you're a kid and you're like exploring things, and you get that feeling in your stomach where you're like, you go around the corner and you're like, I've never seen around this corner before, or like I found like a root from a tree and I can like jump over it, and how cool is that? Like all of those, moments of finding like a really immense amount of like joy in the
Yes.
ordinary. I think like applying that curiosity to yourself and your mental health journey, because like when you approach things with curiosity, there's no shame.
Mhm.
Shame and guilt do not exist where curiosity does. Curiosity comes from a place of interest. It comes from a place of, excitement and enjoyment. And I think that like when you are going around your mental health journey, which is a long one, it's a lifelong journey. There's not a, you know, I know some people don't want to hear it, but there's like not really a finish line. Like it is something
Right.
that is like an ongoing journey. It is a marathon that you will run, for the entirety of the time that you have. Uh, and so don't like look at like because I did for a long time, and I just realized like, and it's so much easier said than done. So by the way, everything that I'm saying, do not think for a moment that I'm like, this is an easy thing for you to do, because like it is ridiculously fucking tough. So
Yes.
yeah, just take that into consideration. But yeah, when you're like, don't bash yourself for feeling anxious in a situation. Try to understand that. Look at it from curiosity. Why was I feeling anxious here? What about this situation made me anxious? Maybe I don't know. Oh, well, that's pretty wild. Okay, well, maybe
Hmm.
are there ways that I can make myself not feel as anxious in this situation? Is there ways in which I can thrive regardless of the anxiety that presented itself? Like applying curiosity to your mental health journey is something that will serve you for the entirety of the journey. So be curious, people. Have fun. Be curious. Don't take it too seriously. Life's a wreck anyway, right? So,
I love
yeah,
that.
just have some fun.
Dude, Kyle, this is amazing, man. Kyle, life's a wreck. This is what we're here to do, to talk, be honest, and hopefully help people along the way. And you're certainly doing it, man. So I appreciate you. I appreciate your time that you've given me here on the podcast. I would love to come on Life's a Wreck and just chat about life some more. And if you haven't heard Life's a Wreck, go check it out, and also just keep being curious.